Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, as Labour's long-awaited spending review is announced, I'd like to discuss one of the big winners, cleaner energy. There have been a lot of tough negotiations for money. Several departments, most notably the Home Office, left not very happy. But the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero is one of the beneficiaries. So what is Ed Miliband's plan for the funding, and how is it going to meet Labour's treble aims of generating good quality jobs, making energy more secure and affordable, and tackling the climate emergency? But first, for daily news and politics, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So the big energy news all over the newspapers today is the go-ahead for the Sizewell C nuclear power plant. Now, in fact, there are three major nuclear projects announced, I suppose technically four, but three major energy nuclear projects. Alongside the Sizewell project, there's also to be investment in small modular reactors, seen as a solution for power-hungry data centres, and funding for nuclear fusion research. So let's go through each one. So the Sizewell plan is the most newsworthy. That's what's plastered all over the news. So let's begin there. This is a weird one because the project was technically begun by Ed Miliband whilst he was Energy Secretary under Gordon Brown many, many years ago. In fact, for political nerds, there was a famous exchange between Tony Blair at the end of his time and David Cameron, then leader of the opposition, over nuclear power.
And as for nuclear power, let me go through the various positions that the Right Honourable Gentleman has had on nuclear power. His industry spokesman said this: "From about the age of 12, I've had an instinctive hostility to nuclear power." His Shadow Chancellor: "I'm happy to see nuclear power." The Right Honourable Gentleman: "I'm not dogmatically in favour of nuclear power, nor dogmatically against." What's my position? I'm in favour of it. Is he in favour of it? Yeah, no, I'm in favour of it. Hang on. This is government. He asked me what my position is. I'm in favour of it. Right, what's his position? Well, it actually gets better. Let me read his position. He gave it... Just in a moment. He gave his position just the other day in an interview in Green Futures. Just read this. "I want to give every opportunity for green sources of energy to come through. If they do, well and good. If they don't, and we have to keep the lights on, then nuclear might come into the picture." So, hang on a minute. So what's he going to do? The Cabinet Secretary, he's the Prime Minister, the Cabinet Secretary comes in and says, "I'm afraid the renewables haven't generated as much as we want. I'm afraid we're not going to be able to keep the lights on." What's he going to say? "Rustle me up a nuclear power station."
And the reason it's so bizarre is that not only did David Cameron try to use the lack of nuclear as a stick to beat Labour with, just at the point where Labour were actually going, no, we're absolutely going to go with new nuclear options. But Boris Johnson tried the same thing over a decade later when he was Prime Minister. And it was like, but Labour were the ones who were going ahead with nuclear. Tories came into power and stopped it, did nothing for 14 years. Then they start going on about how Labour didn't introduce more nuclear power. Huh? Another classic case of the Tories saying, we need something, why aren't Labour bringing it in? And someone going, hang on, why didn't you bring it in? Never mind that. Now, there are, of course, arguments for and against the project. In favour is the fact that we need new source of energy to replace ones which are coming to the end of their life. You know, we also need more energy capacity, full stop, to cope with the move towards, say, electric vehicles, data centres for AI technology in particular. Effectively, in the move towards net zero, we need more of our energy coming directly from electricity, not so much from fossil fuels. You know, from a climate emergency point of view, nuclear is clean, as in it produces no damaging emissions. It's also reliable, won't trigger major political rows because most people and parties are in favour. Miliband has also argued that this project alone would create 10,000 jobs, and that jobs in the nuclear sector tend to have good paying conditions, something the country needs more of. It's also worth noting that although this project will include private investment, the majority is coming from the government. So Miliband made the point that this will be a majority publicly owned power station, the first major step in using GB Energy to give the UK a stake in our own energy sector. Because right now, power is provided entirely by private companies. So it's not just that our energy is more expensive because we have to peg it to the price of getting electricity from gas, which is like the most expensive way of doing it. But it's private companies, so there's profit on top of that. some of which are owned, or they are state-owned, just not our state. They're owned by neighbouring states such as France. So we're paying into the treasuries of other countries when we could be providing our own energy. There are objections, of course, reasonable ones as well. Personally, I'm not a fan of reliance on nuclear fission for the long term, because the waste produced, it has to be stored securely for pretty much the rest of time for practical purposes, which means an expense into the long term. However, in the here and now, yes, we probably need another generation of fission power. Some people argue that the costs often spiral out of control, and there's an extent to which any project taking a decade or more to complete will do that to an extent, because inflation, you can try and predict inflation, but mad times. Also, those who object say that because the government are now committed to the project, they've given away leverage to private investors who are not yet committed. And that's a valid point, potentially. It may be a case of Labour needed to announce a lot of good news urgently, even if there's a price to pay later. So yes, it may well end up costing more than planned. Probably would. Especially if the global economy remains chaotic. But the thing about the global economy is that climate change is one of the major factors affecting it. People often don't think about it, but consider two major things that climate change does in this respect. So first, extreme heat and flooding, both environmental consequences of climate change, result in vast amounts of agricultural land being lost. That reduces our capacity to produce food, driving prices up. Even here in the UK, climate change, there's a cost to our food that comes from various things, including Brexit, but also climate change. Second, so lost resources means that people have to move out from those, so you have refugees. That increases the chances of conflicts and wars breaking out, which reduces global productivity in other sectors as well as diverting money from more useful projects. I mean, look how readily people understand how Russia's invasion of Ukraine hit the economy. Nobody doubts it. Nobody doubts it. Like, it's even with Brexiteers, you try and say how Brexit died. Oh, yeah, that was the war in Ukraine. Okay, so you understand that the impact of the war in Ukraine is immediate and massive. So people understand that war and the loss of agricultural land, because Ukraine had a lot of farming, right, due to an invading dictator, damages the economy across the world. You get that link. So it should be just as easy to understand that if climate change causes the same destruction, you are going to get the same knock to the economy. So frankly, the best way to have a stable economy is reduce our carbon emissions and then also mitigate against the damage which is now unavoidable because we didn't act in time, despite over a century of warnings from scientists. In fact, a politician against net zero is a politician against a strong economy. But it's not just about Sizewell. The funding for small modular reactors is hoped to tie in with Labour's plans to attract tech companies to develop AI in the UK. There's also investment for nuclear fusion. Now, the project is in Nottinghamshire, which I thought was a little bit unfortunate, because that's one of the councils Reform UK have just taken over, but can't work out how to arrange meetings. Might be a bit of a problem trying to research the energy solution of the future in a part of the country devolving back to the medieval period, but we will see. But of course, nuclear fusion is something of the holy grail in energy, isn't it? If it can be developed. It would be a reliable source of energy. It would be clean. There would be no toxic or radioactive waste. I imagine where we could be as a species if we spent as much money and effort on developing technologies like this, rather than spending money on being dicks to each other. But although the nuclear funding was the big story, there are others as well. There were fears that the funds for cutting back on home upgrades would including better insulation, would be for the chop. That hasn't happened, because for all the Tories claiming to care about elderly people's warmth in winter, they are the ones who scrapped the insulation programme from the last Labour government. Like, if you care about older people in winter, make it cheaper to warm their homes. See, better insulation means you don't need as much energy to do that. So that brings bills down for everyone, including pensioners. It reduces our carbon footprint. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Don't get such great gas company profits, do you? It's actually quite funny in a way. Only a couple of months ago, the Tory media were trying to claim that Ed Miliband was for the chop in a future reshuffle. Oh, he's messed up stuff. He's really pissed off with him. A sign that they fear him as Energy Secretary in a way that they didn't as Labour leader. See, this is a man who is completely committed to climate action, knows his stuff. I mean, he was Energy Secretary nearly 2 decades ago, and he is again now. He's now walked away from the spending review, one of the winners of it. I think it's safe to say Starmer's fully behind the project and absolutely no plans to get rid of one of his most knowledgeable secretaries of state. I mean, yesterday Miliband was talking about getting Britain off the fossil fuel roller coaster. Now, if we do that, oil and gas giants no longer have as much power over us, and we can build a brighter future for everyone. No wonder the Tory media are terrified of Miliband these days. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and for more content you could subscribe to the channel or become a member for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.